Last year on the front page of the New York Times sports section, there was an article about a football player who was able to collect on his insurance policy. I'm Jonathan Yates with the Culture of Sports, and we're here today with John Schryber, a partner with the law firm of Reed Smith, who made that happen. John, thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
I'm happy to be here, Jonathan.
So can you tell us about that case, what you can?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you that the details of the settlement, of course, are confidential, but we got a denial letter from an insurance company, despite the fact that the player had suffered a career-ending concussion. The New York Times, diligent as it is, found the complaint that we filed against the insurance company that detailed all that had happened. And they put it on the front page of the paper, and then about 45 days later, the insurance company settled after previously denying coverage. And what was interesting to me about the case is it creates the ultimate catch-22 for what is the most prevalent career-ending football injury that we're seeing today, and that is brain injury from concussions. There are so many concussions, we're learning more and more about them. Well, this player had suffered a concussion and had several concussions. And the insurance company put up a doctor that they paid for to interview him. And the doctor took the position that he wasn't clearly communicating his ideas and his words, and therefore that was consistent with making the whole thing up. And of course, it's also consistent with having a brain injury. And this is going to be the immovable object against the unstoppable force. The biggest injury, the most career-threatening injury is concussions. Insurance companies issue products to insure against the consequence of a career-ending injury, but when it's the most severe, a concussion, they take the position that there's not objective measurements of brain injury of a living person, at least. Of course, we know about CTE and those that have passed and the level of severe brain injury, but on a living person, it's not something that you can X-ray or MRI. So it's what they call subjective, and they stand behind the subjectivity to deny coverage, or at least deny coverage before it makes the newspapers and everybody finds out what a crazy position it is they've taken.
Now, is this disability insurance or loss of value insurance?
Well, this was a disability policy. It was not a loss of value policy, but the point is the insurance industry, which of course is issuing loss of value insurance, is going to take the same position if they have a college athlete who has suffered post-concussion syndrome, concussion, and needs to prove that his loss of value, his lack of draft stature, draftability, or placement in the draft somehow derives from an actual injury. And if the actual injury is a concussion, the player is going to face the same problem collecting from an insurance company, because the insurance company will take the same position that you can't prove that your concussion is actually the cause of your loss of value, because you can't even prove that your concussion is an actual injury. So we are in a stage of medical technology and information. We learn more and more and more about how bad a concussion is and how risky it is. And the insurance companies are learning more and more and more about how they can hide behind the lack of objective measurement of that injury and not pay. So the most risky injury for which insurance is needed the most, both by the college player and the professional player, is the very injury that may end up being the most contested by insurance companies. And of course, it's not just the subjectivity of the measurement, it's the frequency of the claims, because more and more athletes are suffering, not just in football, but in other sports, concussions. And insurance companies haven't probably reserved for the level of injury and claim frequency that they're going to get relative to concussions.
Now, I was at a Knight Commission event last October, and they pointed out in their concussion study that football players took the fourth most after soccer, hockey, and wrestling. Where do you see it proceeding with those sports?
Same thing. I mean, it's going to be, at least in football, there is a helmet. In some of these sports, there's no head protection at all. And what we're learning from the medical science on this is that it doesn't take much for there to be a concussion. I mean, when all a concussion is the brain hitting the skull. that's a concussion, and that creates some sort of damage. The issue is how much, and if it happens successively over a career, there can be very bad long-term results. And no doctor would in their right mind send a player, a college student, or even a professional back out to the arena, whether it's soccer, football, whatever it is, when they stand to lose so much long-term in their life. And insurance companies will take the position that their concern is the long-term well-being of their patient who suffered the concussion, and why not go out on the field one more time and see if you suffer that concussion or not? Why not take the risk? But doctors are saying they would never send someone out with those kind of symptoms to be re-exposed. So there's going to be a battle between athletes and insurance companies. And there's going to be lawyers that are going to have to deal with that, both the technology, the medical science issues, and insurance terms.
Now, if I was a college sports administrator, this would concern me greatly. 70% of revenues are from football, and you can easily see where football would be threatened. The state of Vermont is talking about doing away with high school football. What do you think of that happening?
I think there's a real risk. These high-frequency concussion sports, the more we learn about concussions, that parents won't let their kids compete when they're kids and developing, and players are going to be more and more suspicious about the long-term benefits of playing in a sport. At this point, it might be that the easy dollars up front for those that are lucky enough to go on, overshadows the risks. But the more and more we see from CTE and all creates a huge dilemma for the athlete, especially when you consider that the athletes are not paid. In some sports, you could argue they've made a decision, there's a trade-off, there's an economic risk, and there's a health risk. That's militated or mitigated by having insurance if the insurance company is going to pay. Obviously, it's not. It won't be if the insurance company is not going to pay. But because of restrictions, legal restrictions that currently exist, at least at the college level, there is no monetary compensation except deferred, which may be after the concussions or with the injury have already been sustained, which is why there's loss of value insurance. But the problem that is being faced by the athlete is in every other area. For example, if we're talking about a college athlete today, unlike 100 years ago, today he is a fundraiser of enterprises that have been given an enterprise value in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Southern Cal or University of Texas. These organizations, if they could sell themselves as a profit-making organization, that's what the market would be paying, hundreds of millions of dollars. Well, all the other fundraisers for colleges are paid handsomely. But the biggest fundraisers often are, at these most expensive schools, they are the football players. TV revenue is shared on a conference level. And so what we have the example I give, a football player is the most effective and most lucrative fundraiser, and he's paid nothing. They get a stipend, they get an education that they may not even want, but they're required to go through that for at least 2 years before they can get drafted. All other fundraisers are paid, they're not. And one of the unintended consequences of a well-meaning Title IX statute is that, in effect, you can't ever pay the male players that are the fundraisers at the highest level, because you would have to also pay the female players the same amount. And their sports don't bring in, for a variety of reasons we won't get into, but their sports don't bring in that level of revenue that would allow a college to justify paying the women and the men the same amount. So that just means the men will never get paid. That also means that the only compensation that a college or even the NCAA can offer to mitigate against this risk of career-ending injury is loss of value insurance. They can't give them more food. They can't give them, a better budget. They can't give them cash, or at least they can't do it legally. So the only thing they could do, and they could do this with Title IX across the board, is offer loss of value insurance to all of the athletes that participate in the program priced according to whatever the market is, and then the college or the NCAA could pay for that. As far as I can tell so far, that hasn't been offered across the board, which is a shame.
Now, on this show, I interviewed 2 William & Mary football players who graduated with a total of 5 degrees, and they pointed out that when William & Mary recruited them, they used the graduate degrees as an incentive, which no other school did. Do you think that the savvy college team would use the loss of value insurance as a recruiting tool?
Absolutely. I mean, there's evidence out there that recruiting tool that you mentioned for William & Mary is effective. There are players that will go to Harvard instead of a 1A school, 1AA school, I should say, even if the 1AA program is superior and in terms of prestige for drafting into the NFL, because the trade-off is a Harvard degree. A lot of really good players end up at Harvard.
There's a lot of happy mothers.
A lot of, yes, exactly. And so there's something that can be thrown out, but obviously not everybody can be promised a William & Mary degree, a William & Mary graduate program, a Harvard degree. There's only so many of those that go around. So what's left to offset this incredible risk that is being taken, that we learn more and more about, that is so life-threatening as well as career-threatening, concussions. And loss of value insurance is, because of Title IX and these other things we've mentioned, it's about the only thing that has economic value that would prevail under Title IX that can be offered as a recruiting tool. Of course, an insurance policy is only as good as the insurance company's ability to, or determination to pay a claim under that policy. And that brings us back to the issues with insurance companies taking the position that concussions are a subjective something or another that they may or may not pay.
Now, in the book, Boys Among Men, which talks about high school players going on to the NBA, it mentions how LeBron James was fully insured when he was in high school. But that's LeBron James. He's the king. He's the GOAT. If you're an average college athlete, how would you go about getting your insurance?
Well, it's really tough to get disability insurance as a college athlete because the premium and the proceeds, the payout, the amount of the policy is based on just like a company executive's disability insurance would be based on what his expected earnings would be. So if you're LeBron James, it's pretty easy to calculate that, at his level, he's going to be making a lot of money. You can issue him a very nice policy, and there'd be people standing in line to pick up the premium. But when you're, again, the average football player playing in a very good program, I have dealt with recruiting committees and big programs in my own life as a fan of college football, and all the parents hear the same thing. Yes, your son has made a top Southeast Conference team roster. There are 85 people on that roster that all were the top player on their high school team, and your son will be lucky to see playing a down. And they say that after they're on the roster. When they recruit them, of course, they're going to play every down. It's very difficult to end up going to a higher level. The odds are definitely against you. What you have to offer then is a loss of value insurance, but frankly, loss of value insurance, even across the board and for the medium level athlete, is still not going to compensate them entirely, what can, for the risk of injury today at these sports.
Now, in your answer, you said the insurance company will issue a very nice policy. What makes for a very nice policy?
Well, the disability policies that are out there are good in the sense that they say that if you can't return to the NFL and play at your position in the NFL, you are, for purposes of that policy, permanently disabled. Now, that's unusual because, as we know, in the workplace, you wouldn't be determined generically to be disabled unless you couldn't get another job. In other words, it wouldn't be you couldn't play cornerback for the Washington Redskins or some other team in the NFL. It would be you also couldn't bag groceries down the street at the grocery store. So those terms are good. The problem with insurance is the causal connection that is put into the insurance policies that requires there to be a determination made that this injury that you have actually keeps you from playing in the NFL. Let's face it, unless you were dead, you can't prove that. And if you were dead, you wouldn't get any disability insurance because there's nothing that you're missing at that point as a live person. So everything else to them becomes a gray area that needs to be explored. And part of the problem of getting that causal link fleshed out is what the insurance companies do is they hire their own group of doctors who interview the athlete, and this would be the same with a loss of value situation. They're going to hire a doctor. The doctor is going to opine. He's paid for by the insurance company. They will interview the injured party, and they'll usually interview him. If he doesn't have a lawyer, they will interview him alone. And we had a situation that we alleged in our complaint in the case that you referred to at the top, where the doctor made up things that our client did not even say. They wouldn't allow a lawyer to be present when he was interviewed. And the questions that the doctors are asking are worded in a way as if they could have been asked by the attorney for the insurance company. So you have a bit of a one-sided situation no matter what kind of policy you're talking about, and no matter how well it's worded, you still have to, in every case, link up the injury to the conclusion that there's a disability, whether it's the disability that creates a loss of value or the disability of an existing player.
So a lot of these college athletes, they come from single-parent households or the first ones to go to college. How do they know how to lawyer up for these policies? How do they even know how to go for these policies?
They don't know. What college players at that level that you're talking about, they depend entirely on the staff in the college at the sports program. They are dealing with people who themselves may not know that. This isn't, as far as I can see, an effort to keep in the dark the kind of player you're talking about. Mm-hmm. There are many players that come out of college that got no advice whatsoever on how to protect against the economic risk that we're talking about. And the people who they came up through in their own college, we've talked to them, they didn't know about it either. It's amazing, even in the NFL today, there are many players that believe that they'll be covered by an injury under the collective bargaining agreement. They have an agent. Their agent should know about that and know how little coverage that actually provides.
But now, is an agent the same thing as having your own lawyer?
Well, many agents are lawyers.
Mm-hmm. They're not insurance lawyers, though. They're sports agents.
They are. That's exactly right. And so what ends up happening, all of the people that I've represented that have had disabling injuries in the NFL have been referred to me by their wealth managers and not by their agents. Really? They all have agents. They all have wealth managers. And this is collecting on an insurance policy is in the realm of the wealth manager, mm-hmm. more than it is the agent. So the agents really don't generally get involved in those kind of legal disputes. If any, what they're really doing is they're arguing about the contract they have with the team and arguing for new contracts and arguing for the value to bring more money in to the player as a matter of salary, which of course raises the commission for the agent. But when it comes to protecting the client through an insurance policy, the wealth managers know one thing, that there are insurance coverage lawyers that do this every day, and they contact us, and we take it from there. And so far, I think there's not been a case that we've lost or didn't settle. So
now, baseball players have guaranteed contracts. Football players don't. How does that affect the disability policy or loss of value policy?
Loss of value, disability, obviously a baseball player could get one. But the difference between a baseball player having a guaranteed contract and a football player, football contracts, as you point out, are generally not guaranteed. Obviously, if you're guaranteed and you suffer an injury, and let's just give a more dramatic situation, you could have an injury in the first year of a guaranteed $8 million million a year contract. You don't play down, you don't throw a pitch, you don't you don't swing at a puck or whatever. If those are guaranteed, you're going to pay that whole $8 million for that entire 8 years, and with or without an injury. But in football, you can be dismissed from the team. There's some grace in that process in terms of recovery, but because your contract's not guaranteed, they just cut you because you're no longer able to play. That can be because of old age, it can be because of poor performance, it can be because of an injury. Typically, as you can imagine, when players get cut, they don't recite that it was because of an injury. They say it's because of something else, salary cap considerations, those kind of things. That makes it a lot easier for them, and that can make it more difficult for the player who's seeking to recover under his disability policy on the theory that the reason he's not on the team anymore is because he's been hurt. So there are factors and forces that actually, not just the insurance company, that can go against the poor player who has suffered these injuries.
And so it seems to me there's also some cultural aspects to collecting on these policies. If I'm a football player, I'm going to want to be hired by another team. But if I go sue for an injury, then nobody's going to hire me because So what's the statute of limitations on a disability or loss of value policy?
Well, an insurance policy is a contract. So every state has got its own limitations period for contract. When an insurance company sends out a letter that says you've made a claim under the policy and we're going to deny it, and they usually take a long time to do that, but when they do that, that's obviously a repudiation of the contract, and the statute of limitations would begin to run then. Most states it's 3 or 4 years, some states it's 5. But the existence of the policy and the injury puts you as a player on notice that you have to make a claim. So let's say you wait 5 years and the statute of limitation has run and you have never made a claim under the policy. The insurance company is going to say, hey, you waited too long, we're not going to pay. And at that point, their repudiation takes place, but it's on a basis that your claim is untimely, not on a basis that the policy doesn't apply. So at that point, if you went to sue the insurance company would say the breach that you're alleging is a breach that we should have paid 5 years ago, and the limitations period is, in our hypothetical, less than 5 years, and therefore you'd be out of time.
In the same way that a loss of value insurance policy should be an effective recruiting tool, I would think that if I was a sports agent, especially for football players, where the average career is only about 3.2 years, there's a 30% turnover rate, and after the 4th year, they'll generally try to kick you out. I would show that I had effective track record with my clients collecting on disability and LOV as in a recruiting tool for clients coming out of college to be mine.
Yeah, again, it isn't until recently that loss of value and disability insurance for professional athletes, especially in the area of football because of the non-guaranteed contract, has become at the forefront. It ought to be not only a marketing tool and a recruiting tool for colleges, it should be a recruiting tool for agents, it should be a recruiting tool across the board. And I do think, Jonathan, it will become that. The more and more these injuries snowball as they are, especially the brain injuries. We're getting to, you don't throw around the word epidemic, but we're getting to a point where we learn so much more every day about brain injuries, and there's so many of them that, we're going to have a focal point here, an inflection point, where there's either going to be an economic risk prevention mechanism and recovery, or there isn't. And if there isn't, folks aren't going to play anymore. Or they're going to require a lot more in a salary, and the clubs aren't going to want that. I think really the way it's going to go is there's going to be insurance. It's going to be probably more expensive than it is now, or the insurance companies may, and I hope this never happens, put in an exclusion in their policy for concussions and brain injuries, which would be a shame because then there'd be that could happen as well with loss of value insurance. There'd be the most harmful and the most prevalent of injuries would end up being something for which players at any level, college or otherwise, are not compensated.
Now, in the NCAA working paper on loss of value insurance, they had two exclusions that would concern me if I was an agent or their lawyer. Number one was for mental health issues. First of all, you can get mental health issues that are exacerbated by concussions, and they come with it, so that would concern me. And number two was with drugs. Now, marijuana is legal in a lot of states now. I think it's 7, so that would certainly be a huge issue too. If you look in Auburn, players having to sit out for a year because of the NCAA regulation, so what the state of Alabama says is legal, the NCAA says is not legal. So as a lawyer, how would you look upon those two things of the mental health issues and the drug issues and the loss of value policies?
Assuming that, putting aside whether that's a good policy or not, just in terms of dealing with the existing policy, we're kind of back to where we started, and that is, well, what is the cause of the loss of value? I can tell you that folks that have suffered the consequences of concussions turn to not narcotics, but drugs that may be within that drug prescription you're talking about. And it's a documented fact that they will suffer mental health issues from brain injury. It happens frequently. So at that level, the NCAA is really acting no differently than an insurance company. They're going to argue if it involves a mental health problem at all. That cuts against it being something that is from the concussion or some other injury. And if there's drugs involved, they may not care whether the drugs are responsive to the injury or a consequence of the injury. They'll just take the position that it's there. So what I would do if I was attacking the policy is demand there be more specificity, so that it's clear that we're dealing with either drugs or mental health issues that are a result of the use of it, or the condition of it, or the result of a concussion, which is the best example of things that could implicate either of those two things, that the policy against loss of value should not apply.
As I often point out in interviews, college scholarships are great deals. I mean, the amount of money they can be worth 6 figures and more. And, as we're speaking, there are millions of families around the world spending billions of dollars in hopes that their children can get an athletic scholarship to an American college. How come loss of value doesn't cover that? It would seem to me if I had a child in high school who could get a scholarship to, say, Duke to play basketball that's worth, $150,000, $200,000 a year, and then they blow out their knee, could I get a loss of value scholarship to cover the loss of the scholarship to Duke?
There are some cutting-edge economists who believe that if our capitalistic system progresses at the current rate of development, we will ultimately be selling stock in ourselves, and we'll be IPOing it when we're very young.
There were David Bowie bonds.
There you go. You'll have the star player on the Little League team could sell stock in his future financial results and give you a financial statement every year, and you get a percentage of that, and in exchange for the percentage, you give him some money. At that level, yeah. You could get a loss of value insurance policy that related to anything. You could be someone who was aspiring to be a nuclear physicist, and you could have suffered you could have been in a car accident where you got a concussion, and now your brain's not working so well, and this could have happened in college as well.
So rather than be a nuclear physicist, you go to law school, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Something like that. Well, so let me ask you another question about these loss of value insurance claims. Generally, what's the length of the policy?
They vary, so that those are things that can be negotiated with the insurance company, but they should be lengthy. That's something that is a function of the premium, function of how much is going to be paid out.
So I was just reading the book Barbarians at the Gate about the LBO of RJ and Nabisco, and it was interesting that the Wall Street tactic is, you hire certain firms just to scare away the other ones and let them know you mean business. Does that happen a lot with Reed Smith? How often do you guys collect on these cases?
Well, we collect on all of the cases that
100%.
We've done, 100%. And this is only because I truly do believe that the insurance companies feel they have the playing field all to themselves in many of these cases, and they're not dealing with folks that are familiar with construction of insurance policies.
And how often do you have to litigate in terms of going to court before jury?
Well, okay, we have filed complaints in court, but in every one of the cases where we have done that, the insurance company has settled before we ever got to having to go to a jury, and that's fortunate for the clients because obviously litigation is expensive. And they've paid for a policy, and now they're paying for a lawyer to enforce a policy that they thought they'd have a reasonable person on the other side who would do what he promised to do. That doesn't happen, unfortunately, many times. And so if you don't have to litigate the case to a jury trial or any other bench trial, it's obviously a lot cheaper. So, and we don't do these to make a lot of money because, in a sense, you could very easily do these on a basis where you get a big chunk of the recovery. We try to get in and out, and that leaves the policy to the player, very large part of the policy to the player. And some of these policies are, upwards to $10 million, and some are lower. One of the things the wealth managers, by the way, are doing now is, as they see where the insurance companies are going, both in terms of pushback and that you do have to involve lawyers sometimes to get anything, $1, is they're going for bigger policy proceeds. In other words, the amount of the policy is no longer the $1 million or the $500,000. These policies are now being issued at $5, $7, $10, and sometimes $20 million.
So I am a lawyer. I was a general counsel for a publicly traded firm, deputy general counsel for a full committee in Congress. I would have somebody read my loss of value insurance policy or my disability insurance policy before I signed it. Has anyone ever come to Reed Smith for that?
But, okay, no, and I will say this, it is rare. I have a few very smart, good clients in the corporate world who have been down the road and learned the lesson the hard way themselves in the past, where they get lawyers involved. I get involved in reading what a proposed policy is going to say. But most of your most sophisticated corporate America firms, and I'm talking the top of the line firms, do not read their insurance policies before they get them. In fact, what insurance companies do is they don't even issue you the policy with all of the fine print in it until after you've paid for it. They give you a proposal that has a few bullets on it. It's a great business model that insurance companies have. They take the money, it's for promises that they're making, but they don't even tell you specifically what the promises are until a month or so when they issue the policy after they've gotten the check and they've given you a supposed outline. And at that point, you can probably go back and say, hey, I missed it, but corporate America doesn't do that. They put it in their drawer, and then when something happens, the company says, this is something that my instinct tells me ought to be covered because we didn't do something intentionally wrong. There's been some negligence somewhere. Somebody has sued us. These are things that I thought I bought insurance for. And I think the athlete kind of thinks the same thing. He buys a loss of value policy or he buys a disability policy. It's real simple. My head hurts so much every day. I can't sleep. I have migraines. I am not going to go out on the football field doing this. And I know I have a disability or a loss of value policy. This has to cover that, right? Well, of course, they've never read it before. And even if they have, they don't know how the law in their state is going to interpret some of those crazy terms they throw in there. And even if they did, they don't know that the insurance company is going to use you as an example or, just pound the sand on you. So it's not a given. But I would not pick on the athletes here because the most sophisticated businessmen and women in America running big companies are very bad when it comes to reading their insurance policies.
Well, that's the next question I was going to ask you. So if I'm the NCAA or a major university and I pay for the policy, and the NCAA will issue a few of their own under their exceptional student-athlete guidelines, wouldn't it be prudent to have Reed Smith read the policies beforehand to know what you're getting into?
I think
you're paying for it.
Well, I would say, obviously, being a partner at Reed Smith that does this, I would say yes. And our firm has been, for now, 3 of the last 4 years, ranked #1 in the country at insurance law. We will go all the way to trial, but we also do consulting services. We will read a policy. We do what we call a policy audit. And a policy audit is a review of a policy.
And generally, how long does that take?
We can do a policy audit in 2 days. 2 days. Not expensive. because we know exactly what we're looking for. We can report back in writing or orally to the insured and tell them exactly what they're not getting that they might think they're getting, and what else is out there in the marketplace. A lot of problems develop, and insurance brokers serve a very valuable function. They know the product market, all the different types of policies that are out there, and they can negotiate sometimes a good premium. But they are not lawyers, and where a lot of the problems begin are that the insured believes that their broker is their interpreter of the policy. And a broker has to keep very good relationships going for his own business interests with the insurance companies that have allowed them to market their policies. So there is a bit of a conflict of interest that every broker has between the insured and the insurer. The best situation for a broker for his repeat business down the road is that there's never a claim made, is number one. There is a claim made and it's paid without any contest, number two. So
how often does that happen?
Very rarely. But at some point,
it would not be a Reed Smith if it happened.
That's right. There are claims that'll be made and then be quickly settled, but there are big differences of opinion, obviously, when you have a claim for insurance and an insurance company that's determined not to pay. I mean, insurance companies make their money very simply. They take in premium dollars and they pay out claims. If they pay out claims that are less than the amount of premium dollars that they put in as reinvested, they'll make money. If they pay out greater amount of claims than the premiums they take in, they lose money. So obviously their interest is to pay out as little as possible and to take in as much as possible. And so you're going to have this battle at an economic level at all times. And sometimes insurance companies have been found to act in bad faith, which is to put their economic interest over the terms of the policy, interpret it in such a way, take positions that are not reasonable, just in order to serve their economic incentive to make money.
Now, I've done work with a client in the captive insurance industry and the reinsurance industry where I'm guessing a lot of this paper ends up. And that is not a place for a nonprofit like the NCAA or a university. Have any of them come to you beforehand yet and said, can you advise us what to look for in a policy or who to go to? Obviously, the big name is Lloyd's of London. I mean, everybody knows about that. But, have any come to you and say, can you steer us in the right direction so we don't have to hire you in the future to litigate?
No. I think there's a level of confidence there.
Are you telling me I'm the only one who's read your articles?
They are not coming, and it is again. You deal with insurance, and I've had so many clients say to me, John, I don't understand it. I have contracts with all sorts of service providers, and they all do at least try to do what they say in their contract they're going to do. And if there's a problem, we work it out, and that's it. But in insurance, they just don't do what they promise to do. And then they have my money up front, and I'm sitting here holding the bag. This is not just at the athlete level. Again, this is at high levels. Insurance is something that is assumed. I think we have our human nature. It's just to assume the best, that people are going to make good on the contracts. Hurricane blows out your window. You assume you have property insurance. The insurance company is going to say they'll pay it. But then you find out the insurance company says, no, the rain blew out your window and you don't have rain coverage. But it was a hurricane. And so you have those kind of battles with insurance companies that the regular people of this country and elsewhere still assume for the best that the insurance companies will do the right thing, but the thing that I just described, the window blowing out because of the rain and not the hurricane, is an everyday occurrence. At some point, we get a phone call.
When you speak of regular people, I still read John Grisham novels. I don't enjoy them as much as I used to, but one of my favorite was one called The Rainmaker, about an insurance company that just automatically denied all claims over $1,000. And finally, a law firm busted him, and what they did was just declare bankruptcy because it turned out they were owned by an offshore hedge fund company. Have you come across anything like that in the loss of value or disability world?
Not in the loss of value. I've come across that in the surety world, where a bond is obtained to bond a construction project, and next thing you know is that company's in receivership. That doesn't happen a lot, but have not had that in loss of value, have not had that in disability. Disability, as you pointed out, is mainly Lloyd's, the Lloyd's underwriters. They have prided themselves for many, many years that they will insure anything. Joe Montana's right arm was insured by Lloyd's, and I think that was used as a recruiting device for future generations of athletes. I would like there to be more competition in that area. That will bring the prices down, and any notion of a concussion exclusion, let one insurance company do that, and let's see if the other insurance companies would follow. As that would kind of cut out the legs of the entire process.
So based on our conversation here, it seems to me if I was the NCAA or a major university, I would be deeply concerned about the future. I mean, my business model is completely threatened. I'm looking at basketball and football. I've got concussions coming up. I've got marijuana issues. I've got mental health issues that everything are going to destroy the policies. If the athletes get being paid, that's going to bring up a whole new issue for loss of value policies. What should they do to prepare for the future?
Well, and I think it's even maybe worse than you paint it, because
that's what a lawyer's for.
Well, here's the problem is that our athletes are becoming bigger, stronger, faster, and heavier all at the same time.
Have the policies adapted?
Well, I mean, if you follow the trajectory of the concussion cases, they increase as everything that I just said increase. Speed, weight, all of that, power. There is a theory that one of the reasons that some of these insurers are pushing back so hard on the concussion coverage and coming up with loopholes, causation loopholes, is they never counted on this progression to the point that we are now, where the level and intensity of the injuries of concussions are where they are now. They probably were as ignorant of that risk as most of us were when they were developing their reserves and their programs. So yeah, I don't think the insurance companies have adapted. And my point, I think, also is that one of the directions that they may take is to actually exclude concussions from coverage. Now, that does create a doomsday scenario, because if the biggest risk with this power, speed, weight quotient is concussions, and they're not going to be covered either by loss of value or disability insurance, the NCAA is going to have a huge problem, because there will be fewer and fewer participants in their program who will not participate the more they learn about concussions, and the more they learn about not having it covered by any kind of risk shifting mechanism.
How proactive is the insurance industry? I've done a lot of work on this issue, and when you look at the average weight for a Pittsburgh Steelers offensive lineman in the mid-70s, it was 245. For the Hogs, for the Washington Redskins in the mid-80s, it was 267. We've got high schools in the D.C. area where the offensive line average is 320. Has the insurance company ever come to football and basketball and said, as you said, your players are bigger, stronger, faster, and they hit harder? Increase the size of the football field now. Raise the basket to 11 feet so we don't have guys trying to dunk and getting their legs taken out from under them. Has the insurance industry been proactive to try to mitigate their exposure on these policies?
No, they haven't, and it is an interesting situation, because if you seek to obtain property insurance, liability for slip and fall cases in your building, insurance company will make a site visit. And they'll make recommendations. You see these TV commercials all the time where they're the masters of risk mitigation. They'll make suggestions that you ought to do this and this, get your premium lower, and you'll have a safer experience.
Smoke detector every floor.
Smoke detector every 2 feet, whatever it is. Not so. In fact, the argument could be made that it's only been the knowledge that there are so many injuries and the risk is as high as it is, that has created the market that exists today for disability and loss of value insurance. I don't know that anybody would be paying the kind of premiums that folks are paying now for these products, these insurance products, 40 years ago. It is because of the money that's involved and the money that is put at risk that these products exist and that the premium dollars come in. So there is a tension. On the one hand, the need for risk, the perception of the great risk is what drives the premiums, and as I said before, that's where the profits come. On the other hand, if they have to pay out claims, they end up chipping away at their profit. So they have a delicate balance, and I still think the real problem they have is they still haven't evaluated fully what's going to happen with the concussion situation.
Now, Lloyd's of London did not get to be Lloyd's of London by being stupid. They have never taken anything that said, like, no more AstroTurfs, no more kickoff returns, anything like that to try to lower the exposure, particularly for concussions.
No, and keep in mind, we're dealing with, especially in football, every one of those clubs is their own organization. It's like their own company. They decide to put in AstroTurf, they put in AstroTurf. The NFL doesn't decide to put in AstroTurf. Individual clubs do it. And of course, individual clubs did remove AstroTurf once it became profitable to do that. It was for safety reasons as well. But let's recall why AstroTurf really came into place, putting aside the unique situation that the Astrodome had, where they originally had grass. The grass couldn't grow. Oh boy, we built a stadium. We better put a rug on it now. Everyone else did it because they could play football and baseball on it, and they could get it dry quickly. They could make more money by doing that. The maintenance costs of grass, of course, is extremely high relative to AstroTurf. But then all the TV contracts and the revenues came in, and they needed to protect their players then. The incentive for protecting players should be at the club level. That's their asset. And so then we saw grass fields with excellent conditions for preventing knee injuries, which is the key. We now see more cushioned helmets coming in this year, both in college football and in the NFL. But with all of these things, we have a tension. For example, if I give you, and you're a young football player, a helmet that you swear to the football player is state-of-the-art, space age, you can't get hurt, your brain is safe, well, that means I'm going to use my helmet every now and then, despite a 15-yard penalty, as a weapon, and therefore increase the risk of a neck injury or a head injury. There's a kind of a standing joke right now in the NFL and in college football that the best way to prevent head injuries is to go back to the little leather helmets with no face guard. You want to see guys not tackle with their head?
Well, let's talk about baseball for a second. The most highly paid athlete today is generally a baseball pitcher. And studies have shown that in what they call $100 million pitcher, the average ERA is around 3.5 when they're under 33. Over 33, their average ERA goes up to a 3.75, and the league average is always about a 4.25. Obviously, they're losing value as they're getting older. Can a policy cover that, especially if they have Tommy John surgery along the way? The very act of throwing a curveball or a slider is very unnatural and damaging for an arm.
Well, what you're getting at again, yes, loss of value should address a situation where you lose value for whatever the named causal connection is. For example, if you had a policy that allowed you to recover for loss of value based on getting older or throwing, it wouldn't be worded that way, but throwing a certain number of pitches because we can correlate that to really it's a decrease in muscular performance, and it's a degenerative condition to throw 150 pitches every fifth day for 10 years. Scientifically, that's going to be injurious to the arm at some level. Now there are pitchers, Bob Gibson and Clemens and Nolan Ryan, that had such perfect mechanics. That wasn't the case. But nevertheless, for the garden variety normal pitcher, that's going to be a problem. So that could be within coverage. Of course, you're always going to have the problem that if it is not defined that way in the policy, that this level of wear and tear as you get older, the number of pitches we're using as an example. The insurance company will say, no, the reason that you're here is because you're 37.
Yeah.
It's not because you threw the number of pitches that a 37-year-old would be expected to throw that's still in the league at 37.
So I know you're a busy man. Let's go with the pro bono question for
Sure.
the last one. I'm probably one of the few people around who does think the NCAA does a good job. So pretty much what we focused on is sort of like how dire the future is for the
Right.
NCAA. What advice would you give the NCAA and every college out there with a sports program now in terms of disability insurance and loss of value insurance?
Well, I mean, the point here for them is to keep their participants playing at the highest level. And it is, to me, just so obvious that the only way with Title IX and the dynamic being what it is today in the existing regulations and restrictions, the NCAA needs to make a blanket commitment to seeing loss of value and disability insurance. It is the least they can do, given the incredible risks that these amateur athletes are going to, all to raise money for the schools that are the members of the NCAA.
It's excellent advice, Mr. Schryber. Let's hope it's followed very soon.
Thank you, Jonathan.
This is Jonathan Yates with the Culture of Sports. Thank you for joining us today.